The unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect truth is seldom met with, even in 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see and hear it, we can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. The title of the talk this morning is, It Doesn't Matter How You Feel. At a recent week-long retreat, Reverend Master Kinray gave a wonderful talk on feelings and emotions, and today I'm going to be talking about the same basic subject, which I'd already decided on before becoming aware of Reverend Master Kinray's talk. As it's from a different monk, it'll be from a slightly different perspective. And a lot of it is from my personal experience, so I beg your pardon if I seem to talk about myself a lot. But feelings and emotions are something I've had to do a lot of training with, and so I'm calling on my personal experience to talk about. A long, long time ago, I was a miserable novice monk. I'd come into monastic life with a lot of enthusiasm, but very new to training and carrying a big load of resistance. I wasn't just miserable from time to time. I was full-time miserable. Coming from living happily alone, I was now sleeping in the zendo with 18 other novices. From working alone, quietly sorting through documents as a paralegal, I now found myself working in the focused activity of the kitchen, together with several of those other novices. This was so nerve-wracking that one day I ran out the kitchen door and found the only hiding place I could think of in the temple, which was a toilet stall in the women's bathroom, where I pulled my feet up under me so that nobody could see me in there. When I just couldn't figure out the walking pattern for ceremonial circumambulation, which still gives me a little trouble today, I decided to hide in the North Woods during my first ceremony as a postulant. And that's how it was long, long ago. At that time, each novice had a senior monk assigned to them to give them spiritual counseling and advice. One day, I went to my assigned monk and asked, "What am I doing wrong? I feel so miserable all the time. It must mean I'm doing something terribly wrong." And the monk's answer was, "It doesn't matter how you feel." Now, I didn't understand at the time the teaching of not basing my training on the feeling of my emotions. So I went out the door, mumbling to myself, "It doesn't matter how I feel? You might as well say it doesn't matter whether I breathe." I just didn't get it at that time. I'd always based my response to life on my feelings and emotions. When I felt good, everything was fine. When I felt bad, everything was wrong, and that was that. The miserable novice wasn't at that time quite ready to get the rug pulled out from under her. So I'd like to invite everyone to take a minute and recollect a strong feeling. If you're not feeling something right at this time, choose any one you can remember. And don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to tell us what it is. It can include anything of the body and mind, an itchy eye, despair, great joy, anxiety, whatever. So just take it, put it in your pocket, and put it aside for later. Recently, I looked up the word feelings online and got a list of 27 emotions that they've now identified scientifically, including things I never thought of as emotions, such as boredom, worry, and dare I say it, sexual desire. So I want to think in terms of feelings today, more as the sensations that we all experience, not just limited to emotions, but including everything coming in through the senses, including the mind. In Buddhism, the mind is considered one of the sense gates: eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. As the tongue receives tastes, so the mind receives thoughts, opinions, views, and feelings. The Buddha discovered the teaching of the chain of dependent origination during the night of his great enlightenment. And this is not going to be a talk on dependent origination. But we can all use an aspect of this profound teaching in training with our attachment to feelings in order to find the cessation of suffering. The chain of dependent origination is a detailed explanation of the second noble truth, which is the cause of suffering, which is grasping after our desires. Desires themselves aren't necessarily the problem. It's when we grasp after them and cling to them that we cause harm to ourselves and others. The chain begins with ignorance, not seeing things as they truly are. Ignorance then conditions volitional formations, which are our predispositions. And then on to consciousness, which conditions name and form, which leads to the sense organs. The sense organs, including the mind, lead to contact, which leads to feeling, and there we are, feeling, which leads to craving, and then on to clinging or attachment, and from there to becoming, birth, decay, and death. So how can we use this in training with our feelings? We can approach the problem through the links of feeling, craving, and clinging. As the Buddha taught, fostering habits such as craving and clinging is like fertilizing noxious weeds. And thus I implore you, dig up the roots of all craving. I give you my blessing for this work. And those are the words of the Buddha. The Buddha's giving us his blessing for this work. The point is that we can break the chain of suffering at the link between feeling and craving. We can recognize a feeling for what it is. That's why we pay attention. We can recognize a feeling for what it is, impermanent, unsatisfactory, and not me or mine. We can accept it and let it go. Easier said than done, right? My experience suggests that when we don't catch that feeling before craving sets in, there's another chance at the link between craving and clinging. The Dharma is truly compassionate. Without fail, evil is vanquished and good prevails. Easier said than done, and we can do it. I'll offer an example from my own experience. Who isn't familiar with the notion of hurt feelings? Not long ago, I perceived something someone else had said as an insult. that they were comparing me unfavorably with someone else. Now, the person probably wasn't even thinking of me when they said the thing. It's not about me. Although I recognized it as a feeling, one of those things that don't really matter, still, it stung for a while. Later, I even found myself competing with the person mentioned that I felt I was being compared with, as if I needed to prove to myself that I was just as good as they were. At that point of clinging to the hurt feeling, I was able to ask myself, is this what you choose to do? And the honest answer of no opened my heart to the willingness to let it go. Recognizing the craving for a good reputation, for people to think highly of me, and stepping between that and the action of clinging or grasping led to the ability to let it go and break the chain of that particular suffering. Ajahn Sumedho, the Theravadan Buddhist teacher, says, the acceptance of emotion is actually the letting go of it. And I want to repeat that because it's very pithy. The acceptance of emotion is actually the letting go of it. Easier said than done. You know those little weeds whose seeds stick in your socks? I think we have them everywhere throughout the property. And they seem to have little curved barbs in them. And they stick in your socks, and they're the dickens to get out, and they're scratchy. You don't want them, but there they are. So it is with unpleasant feelings. They seem to have little barbs that stick into our consciousness, while pleasant feelings seem to vanish in the mist. A simple example is when we have some delicious food and enjoy it so much that we eat too much. How quickly the pleasant taste can give way to indigestion. Where do feelings come from? The Buddha taught that volitional actions bring appropriate consequences or fruits. Volition fuels deeds of body, speech, and mind, and feeling reaps the consequences. Shakyamuni Buddha, in his great wisdom, was able to see this clearly. Maybe it isn't quite so clear to most of us. It isn't quite that clear to me yet. Even so, the law of karma makes complete sense for me on an intuitive level. I'm not able to say, for example, that because I spoke angrily to someone yesterday, that's why I accidentally bit my tongue during lunch today. However, isn't it true that in general we feel better for having done a kind deed or spoken a kind word than for having spoken or acted out of greed or anger? I know that's true for myself. Following on from the question of where feelings come from is the question of what to do about them. No matter how long we linger on the memory of a pleasant landscape or a beautiful flower, it's gone. It's no more than a memory. The law of anicca, or impermanence, means that nothing lasts forever. That beautiful flower withers and dies. Sigh. On the other hand, when it comes to unpleasant feelings, that's when impermanence is our friend. The indigestion will be just as impermanent as the delicious taste. We can follow Ajahn Sumedho's teaching The acceptance of emotion is the letting go of it. All acceptance, as Reverend Master Jiyu so often said, is the key that unlocks the gateless gate. Let's not confuse acceptance and agreement. Accepting something doesn't necessarily mean we agree with it or support it. We can accept it as an aspect of truth and learn from it. Take the example of feeling that someone compared me negatively with another person. The person speaking probably had no idea of doing that, but was simply making an offhand remark which pushed a tender button in me. A button that's tender as the result of some past thought, speech, or action. So what can I do with that? Is it a reliable basis for my response? I could get mad at the person who made the comment, or go all out to prove myself just as good as someone else, as I found myself beginning to do. Or I could choose to recognize the hurt feeling, accept it, and let it go. What does it mean to let it go? We can reflect on whether we choose to go with it, run with it. If not, as we do in formal meditation, we can allow it to come up and, neither grasping nor pushing away, we can open the hand of thought and allow it to pass. And I love just this gesture that one of our monks used to make quite often, of just opening the hand and letting it go. Easier said than done. The darn thing just keeps coming up. And each time, with a heart of loving kindness, letting it go. When the annoyance or the hurt sets in, letting it go. When the greed sets in, letting it go. It can be done. The Buddhas and the ancestors have all done it, and as today's scripture said, they in the past were as we are now, and we will be as they in the future. Reverend Master Jiyu used to talk to us about cleansing karma. I didn't know what that meant, and I imagined that it must require more wisdom than was available to me. My understanding now is that acceptance of consequences, in other words, in our feelings, whatever their cause, is an approach to cleansing karma. Bearing both fortune and misfortune in stillness. And there's more. There's right effort to prevent the arising of unrisen harm, to abandon harm that has already arisen, to arouse wholesome states that have not yet arisen, and to cultivate wholesome states that have already arisen. By letting go of unpleasant feelings, we abandon harm that has already arisen, and by resolving to do the very best we can, always becoming Buddha, we arouse and cultivate wholesome states. We saw a movie about a young gymnast who was training for the Olympics. This was her life's dream. At a certain point, she had problems with her technique and felt discouraged enough to want to give up. Her coach talked to her in strong terms and told her not to let emotions control her actions. And I can tell you firsthand that that is excellent advice. Letting emotions run my life has never worked out well. Exclamation point. That brings us back to it doesn't matter how you feel. Your meditation doesn't seem to be going well. Your mind is scattered all over the place. You're anxious. You're jealous. you're happy, you're excited, whatever. These are all impermanent feelings, and by accepting and letting them go, we can avoid giving them control of our actions and creating further suffering. Now, I want to take a few seconds and go back to that feeling we identified at the beginning of the talk. Where is it now? Are you still feeling it, or has it passed on? The other day, my eye was itching during the meditation period, and I didn't want to scratch it, lest I disturb a neighbor in the hall. It felt like it would itch forever, and the next thing I knew, there was something else. The next meditation period, it itched again. I hope some of this has helped to clarify the teaching of it doesn't matter how we feel. What matters is what we do in our thought, speech, and action. We don't need to have a warm, fuzzy feeling in order to practice compassion and benevolence. The wish or intention to practice compassion and benevolence is the important thing. We don't have to like someone in order to do them a kindness. The wish to practice kindness is the important thing. Next time a strong feeling arises, we can take a moment to recognize it, consider it, embrace it, and let it go. We don't have to let our feelings run our lives. It doesn't matter how we feel. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha.